2022 was truly a year of change for Dreamworks with two great films in The Bad Guys and Puss in Boots: The Last Wish, the latter of which truly changed the landscape of animation these days, taking off in popularity here on YouTube. And looking back on them and comparing that to the likes of Pixar and Disney makes you really think if Dreamworks has truly come back. Have they actually retaken the glory days out of Disney's hands by producing great masterpieces while they decide to play it safe? Well, I think the answer to that is mostly yes and a little bit of no. Because despite producing such great films, we must remind ourselves that this era has only begun with two films, but it is truly the beginning of something great that the Dreamworks that I knew was back. And to explain this, we must take a look at why these films work. I have in the past already explained much about Puss in Boots, but there's still so many things that adds that makes it truly stand out, where I've only just recently dived into The Bad Guys. Now of course I will admit that I haven't really watched anything from Dreamworks since 2016 because of how I just felt uninterested in those movies, especially with my irrational hatred of the Boss Baby, where it was really the return of Puss in Boots that recaptured my own interest, coming out at a relatively same time as Avatar, where you couldn't really think much about it because such a big film overshadowed its release. And that was kind of the case for the first few weeks until you actually saw everyone come out praising it, thus contributing to its strong animated legs and reviews where people constantly pointed out how Rotten Tomatoes reviews deem Puss in Boots so superior to something like Avatar despite its relatively small box office. Now, I didn't really watch it in theaters because it came out on demand by the time I finally gave in to watch it, and I actually thoroughly enjoyed it. It captured the true essence of great animation and great simple storytelling, tackling on multiple characters with a wide range of villains and sidekicks that complement Puss's story. And we have to keep in mind that it has been over a decade since the last film was released and when the last Shrek film was released, so this was a true return to a familiar property that many of us fell in love with as a child. Growing up and watching things like Shrek truly showed how much we love pop culture and fairy tale stories, how in combining those two with a talented cast gave us a masterpiece in storytelling. And of course, the Shrek franchise has had its ups and downs, but I'm one of those people who really liked all of them, especially Shrek the Third in that regard, where although it had a relatively weak story, I still enjoyed and had fond memories of it. It was just that Shrek really encapsulated what modern fairy tale storytelling was all about, finding love as an ogre and learning and growing with a family under the backdrop of medieval times mixed with modern 21st century society. And Puss in Boots, both the first and second films, continue that. The first one really didn't impress me or anyone that I knew, but it was just a fun little backstory to his character and a side quest that grew him in his own right, and nothing more than that until the sequel came out in 2022. With The Last Wish, they actually created a compelling story that many can find relatable by using the simple subject of life and the last wish that someone would have, to represent finding yourself in multiple ways, whether it be past regrets, family, or acceptance in society. It's how it uses these well-known concepts such as death and puts it into a physical form and making villains self-aware that really attracts people to really love this film, where it has also been complemented by its masterful animation that they showcase. Compared to the older Shrek films that invoke realistic fairy tales, this film dives more into the animated by its painted visuals, its slowed down frame similar to that of the Spider-Verse to bring in a more vibrant story blending in with its past and its future. It's just that there are so many elements in this film that makes it great, combining everything that we knew and improving upon it to elevate it on another level, where in the past you would actually stick to one fluid idea, but now you could see that they are taking advantage to evolve that into a variety of ones. And we see this actually play strongly into the argument about why these films are better than what Disney has produced. How despite being visually improved, they just stick to one similar tone that hardly differentiates from each other and hampers the story in the process. Of course, that's not to say that all of them are vaguely similar in style, because some take different approaches like Turning Red and Luca, but then again you look at the style of Toy Story 4, Soul, and Lightyear, and they feel like they all want to be the same and not innovate or feel different from each other. Whereas the case in here, where I saw The Bad Guys, the style feels more cartoony and doesn't need to take itself seriously, combining the idea of both humans and anthropomorphic animals living together. This film was actually also inspired by Spider-Verse 2, using that method, which works really well, where it does something more different than the norm by allowing more freedom than what you would normally get with most modern CGI animated films, and centers around this idea of changing and growing to see what you really want to do out of your life. The feeling that these movies involved are that of what I find to be wacky and fun, not always having to take themselves too seriously compared to Disney's structure, which is what makes Dreamworks unique to me in the first place. Everything about this company from its forming was the antithesis to Disney, starting out in that 2D animated department similar to that of the other Disney films within the stuff like The Prince of Egypt, but was still one that was stuck in the shadow of being the Disney competitor, where going off to do 3D instead actually propelled to new heights, this time competing with Pixar. Now of course I don't want to repeat myself in this section with Shrek again, but it's just that the style of what it gave is what made it unique and different for people to love against the typical grain of Disney, which still did 2D animated films at this time. time. And what they have been able to accomplish now with solo stories and a sequel in a year is nothing short of amazing, and I think with upcoming productions like Kung Fu Panda, they can really dive into that a lot more. Because for that franchise, we know in the past that they have used 2D animation in those films as well as the 3D, and it's what makes it unique within its backstory and context of the world, and that's really something that would play to their advantage with the new style. But bigger than that, of course, is the return of Shrek hinted at by the end of Puss in Boots, confirming a movie that many have long waited for and a true signal of the return of Dreamworks that we all knew as children. But of course, out of all those reasons for Dreamworks' return, the best one that truly stands out is the return of the villains, where there is not one, but 3 distinct villains back in Puss in Boots: The Last Wish. Of course, in the case of Goldilocks, it's pretty debatable as far as being a villain, but still poses Puss for that same goal, which is why it still counts in that regard, and something that still works. Because recently from Disney, they haven't really taken a great liking for villains anymore. Their newer films virtually removed having any antagonist in the story where they go off some self-discovery or some type. While it's not completely necessary for a story to have villains as seen in the past with such great films, such as Toy Story in that case, the lack of villains in the modern productions that aren't live-action remakes are truly hurting the stories, because you just feel like there's no stakes to it at all and nothing really ever matters in the end of it. Where instead, DreamWorks really actually took a huge risk to overload that in one movie, and they all work really well, where the response to characters like Death have been truly outstanding, capturing that one element of what makes a villain threatening to the main character, feeling Puss in dread trying to chase after him, being an unstoppable force that he is throughout the concept of Death himself. We also must not forget that people like Jack Horner is truly a great villain because he knows exactly what he does is wrong and just uses it to get ahead in his own life to give it some meaning to him. To be someone who just doesn't take anything seriously and killing people left and right improves upon the nature of a villain, where Goldilocks in that case actually represents a sympathetic villain whose motivations can be justified by not being completely bad. It's just so amazing how well this film really does to split 3 distinct villains that you would find in only one story of one film and put it all together in another film for a much grander and masterful storytelling experience, which all truly trumps Disney's desire to have no villains at all. It's just that using the simple story of what most of us grew up with knowing makes it come back so special, returning of the core of what mattered most, having your heroes and having your villains, which plays all well into the story for a good family adventure, which is just what we all need right now. And DreamWorks truly has that exciting future coming back for it, and I cannot wait to see what happens next. With that said, that's all I really have to say regards to DreamWorks. I'm all done now, so goodbye.